Hello everyone, welcome to the second tutorial we have here to go through. So we have three things that are pending on the to-do list. First of all, the questions that I received from you by emails. Thanks for this. It's good that there are some things that you want to discuss. There are things that are not clear. It's not very good. There are things that are not clear. It's good that there is interaction between us. So there was one question regarding um, the policy homework that I gave you for the crisis lecture, financial crisis lecture. I know 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, something like this. I hope that most of you had no problems with giving me a good answer to the questions that I listed in the Word document or in the document that I posted. Regarding the answers which are satisfactory for me, I think the best moment to do this would be tutorial number 3. Okay, so there we will have then we will have time to discuss those particular policy related and crisis related questions. Secondly, I received some questions regarding the last lecture 4.2 about this particular slides in which I'm asking you about the optimal currency area in the EU and in the US, and what are the arguments for and against having this particular area there in the EU. And I'm pretty sure you have everything that is necessary to give a satisfactory answer for this question. For example, in the textbook, right? You go to page 419. There you have a subsection on optimal currency areas and optimal exchange rate regimes. There you will find a lot of stuff that is relevant in answering those questions. By the way, you remember that there are some chapters from the book that are actually important for you to go through. Most of them we already did. I'm pretty sure we did almost everything from the book. The open ISLM, the open medium run model, and the exchange rate regimes. Yeah, so this would be more or less it. So I hope that you will manage to satisfactorily answer the questions. If not, we can still have some time to discuss it at tutorial number 3. And then some things that are coming back from tutorial number 1. So we solved problem 3.1. We did not solve 3.2 and 3.3. This one is a bit more complex, but this is a generalization of what we will do just in a minute. That is this coordination of fiscal policy problem, the one that we started and we did not finish in tutorial 1. This one is very simple, but you can of course do it so that you have a better understanding of the multipliers in general. And yes, the coordination problem that we started, 3.4, we did A, we did B, and there are still 2 points left to do. I asked you to do it at home, and hopefully you did this. If not, please do it and then go back to the video, because else it makes no sense. All right, so that you just copy the results, the answers. It's really pointless that you just copy paste what we do here at the tutorial. All right. So after you finish, just come back to the video. And now we will start solving the rest of the problem. So we solved A, where we discussed about different multipliers in the closed economy, in the open economy, but keeping the second country exogenous, and in the open economy endogenizing both countries, right? And I think this was A, and then it was point B. So now let's move to point C. Here the question is that one of the countries is increasing the governmental expenditures, and it's increasing to the level that that the output will be equal to 125. And we are assuming that the second country is doing nothing. And now we are asked to solve for the new equilibrium on the goods market in the economy, and solve for the net exports and budget deficit in both countries. Okay, so let's go, and just hopefully that you have your notes with you regarding the previous solutions, so that we can immediately jump into solving. Jump into solving into writing down the equations. So the home country is described by the goods market, in which we have output equal to double. This is the multiplier. Okay, here we have the multiplier, double 22 plus delta G. So this would be the increase in the governmental expenditures, plus exports, which is 0.3 times Y star. Okay. So this is output in the home country, and we know that this is equal to 125. Fantastic. What happens now with the second country, so the foreign country? In the foreign country, well, nothing interesting is happening, so that the output in the foreign country is still equal to something like this. All right, so oh, sorry, no delta G here. We have only exports. All right. The expenditures, the fiscal expenditures, are only in the first country. And now you know what we are looking for. We are looking for a situation in which the governmental expenditures will affect the trade balance in both countries. Yeah? But they will affect this balance in both countries in a different way. And this is exactly what we want to achieve, and what we want to get from this particular problem. All right, so how to solve the problem? Very easily. We know the level of y, so we know the level of output. We also know the level of y star, because it's given by the second equation. So we can use the first equation, y equal to 2 times, okay, let's be lazy. All right, so we know that this is our output, and we know that y star is equal to this. Okay, so we have 0.3 times 2 times the bracket. So let's put here 0.6 immediately. Okay. So this means that on the left hand side we are left with y. On the right hand side we have 44 plus 2 delta G plus 0.6 times 22 times 2. So I'll just put it, take it from my notes. It's 26.4 plus 0.6 times 0.3. This is 0.18 times 2, 0.36 y. All right, so we are already in a very good spot, because what we do now is we put y's on the left hand side, so we get 0.64 y on the left hand side. This is equal to 2 delta G, okay, plus 70.4. Yeah, correct. Okay, but we know what is the value of y, the equilibrium y that the country is achieving through the fiscal policy, and it is equal to 125. So on the left hand side we have 0.64 times 125, which is equal to, do I have it somewhere? Yes, 80. Okay, and this 80 is equal to the right hand side here. So we have everything what is necessary to compute the value of delta G. So that the delta G will be equal to 80 minus 70.4, which is 9.6, over 2 is equal to 4.8. All right. So what's the economic interpretation of this particular number? So if the first country wanted to increase the output, the equilibrium output, from the initial level of 110 to the new level of 125, it has to increase governmental expenditures by 4.8. Okay. Now we are also asked about the output in the foreign country, remember, we have a system of two economies. So now, in this, let's say, two-country system, the second country, the foreign country, will also experience a change in the equilibrium output, since it is dependent on what is happening in the home country, right? So we just put the new level of y into this equation, and we will get that the new level of output is equal to 22 plus 0.3 times 25. It's something close to 37.5, no? Is it? Maybe 37.5. Okay, this is equal to 59.5, which is times 2, 190, right? So you see that also the second country experienced an increase in the equilibrium output by not doing anything. And this is this free riding problem, which we discussed in our lecture 3, which means that if there is no fiscal coordination in the global context, increase in demand in the home country increases also output in the second country through the trade linkages, in particular here through increased imports in the home country and increased exports from the foreign country to the home country. But now let's compute exactly this particular part of the model. So let's try to say something about the net exports in the home country and the foreign country. So the home country, as you remember from the first point of the solution, net exports in this country is equal to 0.3, because both exports and imports are multiplied by 0.3, and this is y star minus y. Okay, so 0.3 times y star, this is the value of exports from the home country to the foreign country, and 0.3 times y is the value of imports. And since we see the difference between the equilibrium outputs, we of course expect that there will be a difference in net exports. So the next net exports in the new equilibrium is equal to 0.3 times the difference between the two outputs, which is minus 6, and this is equal to minus 1.8. All right, so now the question remains, what is the net exports in the foreign country? Well, since net exports in the foreign country is exactly equal to the negative of net exports in the home country, without any computations, we can say that the foreign country will experience a trade surplus, while the home country experience a trade deficit due to an increase in fiscal expenditures. All right, so this is the easy algebra related to this problem. Now let's do something a bit more colorful. That is, let's try to express this change in the equilibrium on a graph. So what we see here on the left-hand side, let's focus on the left-hand side. The right-hand side will be for the second part of the problem. So on the left-hand side, we have the standard space of the total demand for goods and output on the first graph, and on the second graph we have net exports as a function of output. I already put 4 lines on this graph. Hope that all of you are familiar with them. So the first and most important is of course the 45-degree line, which gives us those potential points which can be the goods market equilibrium, so that those points that equalize demand and supply, right? The green line is exactly the line that represents domestic demand for domestic goods, which we called double D, all right? While the blue line corrects also for net exports, okay? So this is the total demand for domestic goods, which we called ZZ in our analysis. The difference between the two curves is exactly the value of net exports. When the blue curve is above the green curve, this means that there is a net, there is a surplus in terms of trade. So net exports is positive, and this is exactly what we see here. In the point where those two curves intersect, the blue and the green curve, there is a balanced trade. The higher the output, the more negative the trade balance. And apparently, the initial equilibrium of the economy which was equal at y equal to 110. Also was the situation in which trade was balanced. Okay, so here we have the output, the equilibrium output, right? The equilibrium point and the equilibrium output, in which we also observe zero net exports. So now the question is, what happens in the after the fact that the home country increases governmental expenditures? All right. So one important note here is that, of course, we are focusing on the home country here, so that there is no confusion. By the way, you can do the same thing, the same graphical analysis for the foreign country, when the only thing that's changing in the foreign country is the value of exports. Okay, this I leave for you. Now let's focus on what is happening in the home country. So in the home country, we know that there is an increase in governmental expenditures, which of course automatically increases the domestic demand for domestic goods, right? So let's just put it graphically. Okay, so what we observe is an increase in the DD curve, and this would be, so this increase would be equal to delta G. So I'll put it like DG. Okay, I don't have my math fonts here, so I'll put it as equal to delta G. All right. So the difference between the two curves is exactly equal to delta G. And of course, we know that the same policy is also affecting the location of the ZZ curve, which is now, since it's flat, we have a lot of space here to draw. And now the difference between the two curves is not only the change in governmental expenditures. So it's not only DG, it's also change in exports. Okay. Is it true? No, it is not true. We keep still exports in this point. We still keep exports constant. So it's only DG as well. So the same value as before. And necessarily, what we observe is that the new equilibrium is now moving from the initial point here to the new point, which is exactly the crossing between the new Z curve, the total demand, and the 45-degree line, right? So we observe a situation in which the output is actually increasing. This is what we know from our algebra. Okay, 125, the new value of output, and we observe two important things. Let me just draw the new equilibrium line. Okay. Okay, fair enough. What do we observe in the new equilibrium? We observe that regarding the new ZZ prime curve, could be black now. I just put it black. The ratio between the location of the new ZZ curve relative to the DD curve is a bit different than what we had before, and it's exactly represented also in the change in net exports. You see that for the given level of output, necessarily the DD prime curve is above the ZZ prime curve, which actually means that there is a trade deficit happening at the level of equal to the difference between those two curves. And this is exactly what we discussed in the previous classes as well. All right. So this is the first figure, first drawing that is interesting from this point of view. All right. Hopefully everything is clear here. So now in the last question, we are asked about the situation of fiscal coordination between the two countries. So both of the countries now want to hit the new output target of 125, but both governments are now increasing spendings by the same amount. So there is a fiscal coordination between the two countries. And once again, we are asked about the level to which the fiscal expenditures have to increase so that both countries achieve the new level of output, plus how this affects net exports of both economies, right? So once again, we are moving forward, knowing that in the new equilibrium, we will have a situation in which y is equal to y star is equal to 125, okay? Previously, it was not the case. Now we have full coordination of what is happening in terms of both fiscal policies. So we can write equation that each of the let's focus on the home country only maybe. So for the home country, you can write the equation of the total demand for goods, all right, plus 0.3 times y star. But now, contrary to what we had before, we know that the second country is also going to increase governmental expenditures. I will call it delta G star, but we know that by definition, this is what we are assuming, delta G is equal to delta G star. Okay, so we have those two equations. We know that outputs are equal in both countries and delta G's are equal in both countries, which means that we can go really a short way here to find the actual solution, because using those two equalities, we can write that y, using the first equation, for example, is equal to 44 plus 2 delta G plus 0.6y. All right, the same you can do with the second equation. All right, so what we are left here is a situation in which we have 0.4 y equal to 0.4 times 125 equal to 62, correct? Yeah, maybe. No, not 62. Oh my God. 0.4. Oh, Jesus Christ. 50, no? Yeah, 50. Okay, cool. Getting old. This is equal to 44 plus 2 delta G. All right? So what we are left with is that 2 delta G is equal to 50 minus 44, which is equal to 3, so that, okay, delta G is equal to 3. And is, of course, equal to delta G star. All right. Okay. So what is the economic interpretation of this particular result? Well, in order to increase equilibrium output in the home and in the foreign country simultaneously, those two countries have to coordinate on the fiscal policy by increasing governmental expenditures by 3 units, both of them at the same time. Now, comparing this result to the previous one, we see that in the previous result, only the home country increased governmental expenditures by 4.8. The foreign country did nothing. This allowed the home country to have 125 as the equilibrium output, but the foreign country was doing this free riding thing and also increased its governmental expenditure, its equilibrium output. Sorry. So what we are left with is a very simple situation in which both countries symmetrically increase fiscal expenditures. So the question about the net exports equal to in the home country equal to negative net exports in the foreign country, saving space, yeah, is equal to 0.3 times y star minus y, correct? And is of course going to be equal to 0. Okay, so coordination of fiscal policies caused that there is no trade surplus nor a trade deficit in either of the two countries. So the home country does not have a trade deficit, while the foreign country has no trade surplus in this particular situation. Fantastic. So now what our graphical analysis tells us. Once again, we are starting from the initial equilibrium, which was 110, the equilibrium output, right? And now we have the following situation. So previously, you remember that the only thing that changed in the home country, once again, we are focusing only on the home country, so that we are, even though, of course, in both countries, the situation is symmetric. So maybe I don't have to put this, all right? So the graph would be identical for the home and the foreign country. Once again, so in the previous example, what you saw is that the difference between the two curves was exactly only the change in governmental expenditures. Now, the situation will be a bit different. So once again, we have the ZZ curve, we have the DD curve. Once again, remind yourself the definitions of those two curves. What is the change in the governmental, what is the change in the domestic demand for domestic goods is of course only the delta G. Yeah, because the delta G is the only thing that we care for that is entering this particular equation. So here we will have the change in delta G in governmental expenditures, which is equal to delta G, right? Now the fundamental question here is, what is the change in the total demand for domestic goods? Which is, just to remind you, which is ZZ equal to C plus I plus G plus NX. Well, we know from our algebra that net exports in the new equilibrium is going to be zero in the home country, which means that the exports is going to exactly equalize imports, which means furthermore that exports is going to increase as well in the new equilibrium. Why does it matter? It matters because now the shift of the ZZ curve is not going to include the change in governmental expenditures as before. It will also include the exogenous change in the value of exports, something that was not present before. Therefore, in the new equilibrium, what we achieve is a situation in which the total demand for domestic goods, once again, remember this has to be a parallel line to the previous one. You can do it easily in your notes. I cannot do it that precisely in Paint. The point here is that the new change in the equilibrium, in the location of the total demand for domestic goods, is not going to be only the change in governmental expenditures, but also the change in exports. How we know this? Well, we know this because the equilibrium level of net exports is equal to zero in the home country. And indeed, we can now draw the equilibrium line. Okay, so the new equilibrium. We know that exports in the home country increased. So not only imports increased, but also exports increased. Exports in the home country increased because the imports in the foreign country increased. This is why this internalizing of the second country is kind of important here. And we observe that this increase in exports also caused an increase in location of the net exports line, right? Depicted by this nice black line, right? Conclusion: in the new equilibrium, you observe that the new output level is exactly the same as in the previous point, but now we observe a change in net exports. So the shift in exports that was not enough, that compensated for the deficit in the home country. All right, and once again, this graph is also valid for the foreign country as well. All right, so hopefully everything is clear when it comes to this fiscal coordination problem. you can relate this particular finding to the current situation in which we observe enormous fiscal stimulus package that is implemented in almost every developed country in the world. And you see that this coordinated increase in fiscal expenditures in all the countries in the world will very probably not worsen trade deficits of some of those countries. Of course, the trade deficits will evolve over time, but not due to the fiscal policy which is now uniformized across all the countries. All right. Okay, so let's make a pause right now, and I will come back to you with the second resource for the tutorial.